Welcome to another internet session for System Thinking Certification Program. I hope you got a chance to see the update that went out on Monday about the fact that Jeff Moore, the CEO of Kumu Systems, was supposed to be a guest presenter today, and he ended up with a schedule conflict for this week. And because I really wanted to talk about Kumu at the same time that he was a guest presenter, I moved the Kumu stuff to next week. And this week I thought I would sort of tell you a story for, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes. And following that, go ahead and answer any questions that you might have about any aspect of this program that you have questions about. And the focus of the story is something that you've probably heard me mention more than once, about trial and learning. When the certification program was initially developed in April, all of a sudden it seemed to make a lot of sense. And much of the content had been put together over the past several years, had been developed over the past several years. It just had never been put together quite in this manner before and offered as a coherent set of content to interact with discussions and feedback and assignments and all of those kinds of things. And so the program was launched at the beginning of May, and all through May things seemed to move along quite well, though along about the beginning of June I sort of began to develop this uneasy feeling about the program itself, and I couldn't figure out why. There was just something about the program that was bothering me, and it actually bothered me for 5 weeks until all of a sudden it dawned on me what the difficulty was about the program itself. And to give you a sense of the relentless pursuit, you may have seen this model in one part of the program itself, but it has to do with how systems thinking world came to be what it is. And it all started in 1976 reading Stafford Beer's Platform for Change, which was sort of a life-altering experience, simply because it provided a foundation for changing the basis for the way that I thought about things. So not to say that I was actually a systems thinker, but there was an alteration in the way that everything was thought about. And over the years, while I worked in numerous areas, systems seemed to be the area that I always gravitated back to when I got lost along the way. And then Sengi's fifth discipline showed up in 1990 and put me on a path that was sort of unalterable, though it meandered along the way, in that shortly after that, a Scientific American article showed up that talked about Stella for the Macintosh, and I thought I was in heaven. I'd done a bunch of simulation programs on IBM 360 using punch cards while I was in college. Talk about painful. And the whole idea of being able to develop simulation models and play with them immediately was just unbelievably fascinating. And at about the same time, they started to publish the Systems Thinker, and Rick Karish was moderating the Learning Org List. And that went on throughout the mid-90s. And there was a fascination with HTML and an effort to learn about what HTML was. And out of that came the systemsthinking.org website, which was, I don't know, 70 or 80 articles about systems thinking, and it continued to develop based upon interactions with the Learning Org List and the Systems Thinker. Though it finally got to a point where it seemed to have run its course, and it got archived, and it's out there on the web someplace, but it's no longer maintained. And the decision was that I've had enough, and I'm retired, and we're not going to do this anymore, until I got grabbed by this thought that Sengi's book was in fact mislabeled, and it should have been titled The First Discipline as opposed to The Fifth Discipline. So there was another website developed called thefirstdiscipline.org Fortunately, that didn't last long because it was actually in the wrong direction. And down the road, then, after annoying everybody else in the world to the extent where people would no longer approve the discussions that I tried to initiate on various discussion groups. So the formation of Systems Thinking World, along with the beginning development of Systems Wiki and the Systems Thinking World discussion group on LinkedIn, all happened within a couple weeks of each other. And the intent was trying to continue to foster an awareness of the benefits of using systems thinking. So there was a whole bunch, there was a half a dozen courses systems thinking related that were developed in Moodle and were offered for 6 or 8 months, though it didn't take long to become less than fascinated with the Moodle environment because it just seemed to be too restrictive and restrained and wasn't doing sort of what it was felt that needed to happen. And about that time, Scott Fortman Rowe showed up with Insight Maker, and about the same thing happened that happened back in the early 90s when Stella showed up. It was just an unbelievable fascination with the environment because it finally meant that people could build and share models instantly without having to worry about, do the people that I want to share it with have the right software that they can use the model, interact with the model that I developed, as opposed to just looking at pictures of models. And so Scott and I developed a working relationship, and we've worked with each other for almost 5 years now, and I've never met him. But we talk a couple of times a week. It's been amazing. Though based upon Insight Maker continuing to try and foster the awareness of the value of systems thinking, there were a whole bunch of webinars done in 2012 around the development of a systemic perspective approach for situations, which then led to the development of 4 books which were published on Amazon, though it only took about 6 months to determine that they weren't what they needed to be or what they could be, so that they were taken out of print, and then running into Khan Academy, which if you have not seen it, it's Sal Khan developing several thousand videos that are individual knowledge nuggets of 5 to 10 minutes long that are strung together to produce learning threads. And it was a model that seemed just what I had been looking for a long time in terms of being able to use it to present the concepts of systems thinking. So I started developing a set of models in Insight Maker and associated videos, and the whole thing was labeled 1 + 1 = because it just seemed to be fitting. And the idea was to produce a set of modules that could be strung together to create learning threads with. So the models and the YouTube videos, and that worked fine for a while, but it needed to come together in an orderly fashion, so that Scott and I decided early last year to write a book called Beyond Connecting the Dots, which was done with 400 sponsors on a Kickstarter project. And we learned an enormous amount in putting the book together, though the technology was pushed right to the edge in terms of what was possible, so that it looks and feels like an ebook until you click on a link and it takes you right into Insight Maker, and you interact with Insight Maker models inside of the ebook. And one can do that on the PC or the Mac without even being connected to the network, because the entire Insight Maker simulation engine is embedded in the book itself. Though the number of pieces of technology that had to be put together to make it work, and the difficulty of doing updates just made it. It still wasn't what it was that we thought it needed to be, and the mental model was one of a metro map of the various lines on the metro were composed of a number of stops, and each stop was a learning nugget, and the lines formed a learning thread. So there was an attempt to develop that in something called the brain, and we started migrating all of the content from Systems Wiki and developing what we tried to put together as learning threads. And fortunately, between version 7 and version 8, the software crashed and we lost 6 months worth of work. And I say fortunately because it was in fact not an appropriate environment. It just was not conducive to what it was we were trying to accomplish. And right after it crashed, the Moore brothers showed up with Kumu, and we were off and running again, so that it enabled the development of the systems thinking certification program. So all of this content that had been developing over a period of years, we finally had an environment to allow us to put this together in the form of what we thought was easy for people to follow, so that you got to do it in little bitty chunks, but the chunks followed one after another, so that collectively they formed a complete concept. And when this was put together at the beginning of it, I talked about the fact that systems thinkers had been attempting to sell systems thinking for 7 decades, and the world wasn't buying it. That we were essentially the greatest impediment to the broader adoption of systems thinking was systems thinkers. To the Pogo quote, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And I understood that. And I understood that in the context of, at one point in time, I spent a number of years doing consulting in the knowledge management arena until I came to the conclusion that I was wasting my time, and I wrote an article called Knowledge Management Bah Humbug. And because the focus was on figuring out how to manage the knowledge as opposed to doing something meaningful. And what I realized last week was that I had in fact developed a program that essentially violated just what I put forward as what I was trying to avoid. So that the systems thinking certification program is focused on systems thinking. And wouldn't it really be better if the focus of the program was on enabling a better tomorrow, and it employed systems thinking as one of the approaches in the toolbox that allowed one to better accomplish that? So with that realization, which I said showed up last week, the program is now under reconstruction, hopefully to be re-released on September 1st. This content that you have access to will not go away. You will have access to this indefinitely into the future, and I will continue to do internet sessions with people to whatever extent it seems to make sense and that people find it helpful. I mean, there's nothing invalid about the content itself. It's simply it needs to be, I think it needs to be restructured so that it focuses on doing something meaningful and explaining how it is that systems thinking effectively contributes to that pursuit. So that currently I think the program confuses activity with accomplishment, so that the focus on systems thinking is the activity, and the accomplishment is actually enabling a better tomorrow. So that's that's the story that I wanted to offer you today, and see what, if you had any thoughts about that story. And then I'm willing to answer any questions you have about any aspect of this program to date. Ron, Mike, Michael, George, Harry, Tom. I haven't put everybody to sleep, have I? Oh, good, Mike. Does my perspective seem to hold water? Does it make any sense, or am I out in left field someplace? I mean, I could still be extremely very wet. Well, Ron, I'm glad that you think it's been a great course. I wasn't trying to say that the content wasn't valid or didn't. I mean, all of the threads are meaningful in I think are meaningful in terms of trying to present the sensibility of a perspective. Though, if I think that I can make it much more, can turn it around so that it has much more utility for people who spend time with it. Yeah, Michael, in terms of, Michael commented about he'd like to carry on with the current program, although he's fallen behind. Though I said my intent is to continue to support this program for all of the people who have registered for it and who are participating for as far into the future as necessary. I'm not about to stop it. It's one of those situations where I have to do this and I have to do something else, because I think the something else is actually improvement on the current program. All right, and we'll see. We'll see how it works out. I mean, I wanted to share the story for a couple of reasons. One is that even though I stated specifically what I was trying to avoid, I ended up doing it anyway, just to explain or demonstrate how easy it is to fall in the traps, and so that you always have to be looking for them, and the idea that no matter how long you have been progressing, there's still room to continue to move forward. I mean, this journey that has taken 35 years now is by no means finished. The next piece is over here. So in terms of, there are a few people that are still on the initial schedule, but not very many. Most people are various and sundry places because of the priorities and schedules that they have to deal with on an ongoing basis, and I understand that, and we'll continue to work on it as best we can. Let's see. Let's see. Ron says, I already know systems thinking, but this bit in Kumu puts so much of it in graphics. No one who is not already a systems thinker won't get the material, but the rest of us do. So that Ron, the perspective is that putting it into this context actually detracts from what I'm trying to communicate? Because you have to already know. You have to already know. Oh, and Ron commented that you have to step out of reductionism. Should I in fact add some more demonstration of the difference between reductionism and a systemic perspective, and how they contrast with one another, and the way that one needs to make that transfer? Well,
oh, well, that helps.
how's this? Can you talk to me?
Yeah, that's better, because I was trying to unmute and I couldn't find the bloody button.
Oh, good. So who's talking?
Sorry, this is Ron.
Okay. So carry on with what you were typing.
Well, I mean, I'm in the same boat. I've been struggling with this for 15 or 20 years. It's you can only, as we used to say, you can only have a Senge conversation with people who have read Senge.
Okay.
I mean, it's just the way it is, because you start using the words in the language, and it's a really nice vocabulary. But if the people you're working with don't know that, you're just missing it. It doesn't catch. So yeah, what you have here will only catch with somebody who already has a general idea if that's what they're looking for. So those of us that do, this is a really nice. It's a nice set of topics. I mean, it's
Okay.
just one.
Well, I talked with someone the other day, and I said, they said, what is systems thinking? And I said, well, just forget about it. Forget the terms. It's all about understanding relationships and their implications.
It's thinking about the way we think about things. That's
right.
That's the simplest, most straightforward answer.
Okay. So that one could actually put enabling a better tomorrow together and present it from the perspective of understanding relationships and their implications, and not use all that terminology.
Yeah, and that's what I've been trying to do, but man, it's really tough to put this into English and make it compact and presentable, because it takes like twice as much verbiage to get across the concepts.
That's why I like videos.
and your videos will work out well.
Okay. Because I mean that's part of, you know, what I also intended to do here, though, with much of the content that already existed, the verbiage was already in there, so that it doesn't get away from the verbiage to the extent that I think it should.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And that's my sense too. But I have this. You know, I'm in the same boat you are. Yeah.
It's the curse of knowledge. Once you know, it's difficult to remember what it was like before you knew.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Once you know systems language, it's hard to speak about anything not using it.
Am I muted, Gene?
I don't think so.
Okay, I guess I'm not. Mike Blackstone here. Yeah. Well, your shift in thinking over the last couple of days, in the notion of revamping the current material with, let's say, the banner of enabling a better tomorrow. I mean, it sounds perfect because I see a dual path. Like what you've put together so far for this course is great for that part of the population that are us, well, I'm going to say crazy people, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think this program makes those of us crazy people more knowledgeable in the area of system thinking, first of all, because I have a lot to learn in terms of the basics, and I'm part of that group that's willing to dig deeply into it and devote some time to it. And then the second part of enabling a better tomorrow goes towards, how do we crazy people become, let's say, more effective, and I don't like this word, but it gets it across, evangelists for the notion of systems thinking, but not systems thinking per se, but what it does. So my experience in talking with people about systems thinking, I'll start out talking about systems, just the idea of systems thinking, but then I'll tell them a story. My favorite story of Ben Franklin as a natural systems thinker, and then they start to get, from the story, oh, okay, that's systems thinking. I do that sometimes. And that relates it to the other people who, the greater majority of the population who are not going to dig as deeply as we're going to dig.
Right. So, right. So, in other words, I would like for the next iteration to have a much broader applicability, so that people, so it's attractive to more than just the crazy people.
Hey, Gene.
Yes.
This is Carvel Swaby, and I've been sitting in on all the sessions today, and I think we at work. I think probably a couple of days ago, I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and the challenge I'm having with the system thinking thing is its applicability, as you mentioned, right? There is, to me, from a value add perspective, beside the thinking aspect, which is the philosophical aspect in terms of the holistic thinking and all that, and the cause and effect, I think it needs something more like a tool, a methodology, something to complement it. And I think the closest thing that comes to mind for me is more of a simulation. You model the cause and effect type of diagram, or the flow diagrams, and you kind of simulate, okay, what if we change this, and you put some sort of attributes and values on certain entities or objects or component, whatever it is that makes up a diagram. But it needs to have something that can, yes, demonstrate the real situation as it is in terms of the entire system, would it be an organizational system, and simulate potential, what if we change this, and what is the effect it has, and that sort of thing. So the closest thing I said is really about adding some sort of simulation piece into the system thinking thing, and it might just be a big win there.
Okay. Within this program, there's an introduction to the quantitative models, the simulation aspect. Now, my initial thought was that for people to develop a skill at simulation took more than what I could embody in this particular program, which maybe is wrong. Okay, and that because it's not there, it doesn't give people the real connection that they ought to get in terms of what it's capable of. So, I mean, in the first parts, there were a couple of simulation models to give one a sense of, here's what you can understand from a qualitative perspective, but there are limits to what you can understand from a picture. There are times when only through a simulation can you really get a sense of the implications of relationships. and then to when I actually talked about Insight Maker, I talked about rich pictures, causal diagrams, and then did some examples of simulations, though the program didn't expect people to become. In other words, to actually complete the program and receive certification, developing simulations wasn't actually a requirement. Though from your perspective, there's something missing when that aspect isn't better understood. Am I providing the right perspective on this, or am I misinterpreting your comments, Carvel?
I think you're correct. I think you're spot on there. I'm just thinking that because I am struggling in terms of trying to sell this thing as well, right? It's really, as I said, it's a thinking thing. It's more a philosophy, a philosophical way of viewing things. But then most people want to see something that they can use, and that's where I'm struggling with. They want to be able to apply it. Yes, we know, okay, we have to think holistically. Yes, there's cause and effect. Yes, there are ways we can model a scenario. But then what's beyond that? How do we go about solving problems, systemic problems? And that's where I'm at a loss there in terms of some tools or techniques or methods to aid in that process.
Yeah, sorry, this is Ron again.
Yes, Ron.
That's exactly the problem, and I don't think we should ever present a systems approach to people who are not systems thinkers, because you'll lose them. So I'm an ecologist, so what I generally do is put it in ecological terms. And honestly, straightforward ecology that came out of a couple of books by Tim Allen at the University of Wisconsin is basically systems thinking, but it's designed for ecology, but it's also designed such that you can look at the ecology of social systems. You can look at the ecology of economic systems. You can track flows. You can look at individuals, and you can do all the same types of analysis, and you can look at the same types of models. You use their language, but when you piece things together, when you look at levels in the system, when you look at the speed of interactions, the back and forth, that's when you think ecologically, and that's when you use those terms instead of system thinking terms, or the preset ideas that come with most of Senge stuff.
Okay.
And I always lose everybody when I talk ecology, so I'm used to that.
Well, no, I don't think you lost me as much as you just. When I end up having conversations with people, they end up taking naps while I'm thinking about responding.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Gene. I was in between two things, so that's why I didn't respond. So I was texting a message to my daughter. So,
okay. No, I think it's one thought connects with a thought connects with a thought, and I'm running this train, right? And somebody's waiting for me to answer. And when you were talking, Ron, I was thinking about the similar, or essentially the parallel of ecology and systems. I mean,
yeah, to me, there's
the definition is
yeah,
essentially the same thing.
It is, and when you really understand ecology, you really understand systems, and when you understand systems, you understand ecology. And once you wed those two things together, there's really nothing that we do on this planet that can't be explained using the combination of the two.
My initial thought is yes.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about it for 20 years, and there's no question.
Well, see, but I'm playing catch up.
You know?
Right?
Gene, I had...
Go ahead.
Yes, Mike.
All right. So I was going to ask Gene a question in terms of your experience to date. What approach do you take in your engagement or past and prior engagement with customers around, taking this system thinking approach to solving problems? Are there a special type of a method you use or technique? What approach do you normally take when you're engaging your clients?
I ask a lot of questions. So that the part of this that I did actually finally get over, which took me a long time, was based upon that comment from Blanchard's book, The 1 Minute Salesperson. While almost everyone loves to buy, almost no one likes to be sold. And when you tell people things, you tend to push them away. Though when you ask them things, you tend to bring them towards you. So it's between Blanchard's method and the Columbo approach. If you remember the TV program Columbo, who never seemed to tell anybody anything. He just wandered around and scratched his head and asked questions about things that he didn't understand and sort of created holes for people to fall into. That rather than trying to convince somebody else that they should use systems thinking, what I do is ask them about the situation and ask them about the way that things connect, so that I don't build models for them. I get them to build models. I have a friend of mine who says everyone else's models are ugly except your own. And so that by interacting with a person and asking questions and to get them to build a model, I don't then have to explain the model to them because they own the model. They understand it because they built it, which was the reason for the bird feeder dilemma being hopefully an example that almost anybody could relate to, in terms of, if I think about this situation and I act based upon that limited amount of thought, here are all of these other things that will in fact actually happen, even though I didn't think about them, and I will then end up essentially being the victim of my own limited thought. And I've yet to have someone walk through the bird feeder dilemma and not sort of get the picture, because in other words, it just sort of unfolds this story for them step by step. And all of a sudden they realize that, oh, I'd be in much better shape if I thought about all of the relationships before I decided to do something, as opposed to afterwards. So that rather than going to somebody and trying to convince them that we should look at this from a systems perspective and use systems thinking, I just ask questions about, okay, so if we do this, who is it that's going to be impacted in what way, and how will they respond, and who else and what other things influence this particular situation, and what are the limitations, and because they know the environment much better than I do. It's just you just sort of facilitate them thinking through it, as opposed to trying to sell it to them.
Right, to do it from the side. Yeah. Well, and that's that's what I use is Checklin SAW systems. The CATWO process, or just the of all the things, what are you interested in? Okay, since you're interested in that, what are all the things that you can expand from there, and what are all the connections? And then you drop down into, and these are the parts we model, these are the things we understand. And you don't ever try to put a systems model in front of somebody before you spend a lot of time just talking to them about what they think.
Right. The comment that I often make about, I spent 30 years with people asking me what it was that I did, and as I tried to explain it to them, I could see their eyes glaze over, and the story going through their head was, why the hell did I ask, and how do I get him to stop? Right? And then one day someone asked the question, and sort of, I don't know where it came from, but my response was, we figure out how to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new ones in the process. And their response was, oh, I want to know more. And I didn't know what to say because that had never happened. And the statement is, it's not absolutely true, but it's the intent, all right, that we do in fact try to figure out how to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new problems in the process. Historically we've proven that we are terrible at it.
Well, yeah, we are, because we don't understand who the client is. We don't actually know who the system serves. We usually know some of the actors. We kind of understand all the transitions, but there are a bunch of unknown ones that, or just unthought of, that we don't put in there. So, yeah, and unless you go through those first three issues of actually what you're doing, who benefits or who loses from that, and who are the people who are causing those actions. And so you don't ever have to put up a mile or anything. You just have to say, who do you think? Who do you think we're working for here?
And though I find that it's very beneficial to get the pieces displayed visually so that they get a sense of the fact that there are multiple relations that are relevant simultaneously, as opposed to just discussing it. I mean, you discuss it, and you discuss it, and you discuss it, and the pieces that you started with seem to fall off of the edges and get lost. So I firmly believe that clients, that the most effective interactions or interventions are those which are pursued by all of the relevant stakeholders, based upon a model that's developed by all of the relevant stakeholders. But also, though, realizing what was put forth in the Jackson model, someplace in the midst of here, in that the context in which you are trying to function, the context of the level of complexity of the system and the alignment of the stakeholders is essential to understand, because it defines what's possible and what's not. It's tough to do soft systems methodology with a group of stakeholders who simply cannot agree on what the purpose is.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. If you can get, even if you can get the disparate groups to come up with their own catwoe, then at least you have a starting point for the discussion. You can say,
right,
oh, you think this is what's happening. We think this is what's happening. And this is what we think. These are the items or the people or the animals or the systems that are being affected by what's happening. Yeah, and then you at least got a place to sit and go, okay, where's the middle here?
Okay, I agree. And see, Michael commented that Michael doesn't have a microphone. He said simulation may be better as a separate program. It takes a lot of time and effort, which is, I mean, you can do superficial simulations, though to get the data that you really need is oftentimes difficult and time consuming, and one has to understand whether, can I develop a level of understanding sufficient from a qualitative perspective to allow me to act to the extent that I need to, or do I absolutely have to know answers to questions that I can only get from a simulation, knowing that it's a far more difficult, more resource-consuming effort to do that. And then Michael says, okay, Michael has a question about the program material before we end. What's the question, Michael? Maybe Michael's typing. All right, when Michael's question shows up, I'll address it. Are there any other thoughts? Okay. Well, from the sessions that we had on systems archetypes, Rebecca Niles from Leverage Networks was a guest presenter, and she walked through the work that they did with a client in terms of having the client develop and understand the relationships that were relevant to what it was that the client was seeing, and there were a number of graphics that she displayed, so that if you go to Systems Archetypes and watch either one of the two videos from those sessions, and there's a copy of her presentation that's downloadable on the Systems Archetypes node, which you might find informative. Michael asked about, there is a reference to the Gerbil Trail during the Network Management Strategy video. Is the idea to work through the types in every situation? The Gerbil Trail was something that I presented in the Virtual Systemic Inquiry thread, and it was when looking at the way that, or the alternatives that a group of people have to work collaboratively on something. The Gerbil Trail, which might also be called round robin, is where there's 5 of us working on something, and it gets sent to me, and I make edits and changes, and I send it to the next person, and they make edits and changes, and they send it to the next person, and everybody that makes changes sends it to everybody else, and it ends up with overload and an editing nightmare for whoever is responsible for the mess. So that's what the Gerbil Trail was a reference to. With regard to systems archetypes, the intent was to understand the concept of an archetype and go through the ones that I thought you would see most often, to understand the relationships that are creating the behavior of that archetype, to a point where in the future you run into a situation and you say, I think this is an archetype, so that you could go back to the map and look through it and find out, determine if it is actually an archetype. Somebody says, I can't remember all of these. Well, after 10 years, I can't remember all these either, which is why I remember where the picture is, and I go find the picture and walk through the structure and say, well, is this what's happening? And then I go from the picture to the actual structure to sort of validate that that's the structure that seems to be playing out based upon the relationships. So that I have continued to find the archetypes to be extremely useful from multiple perspectives. One is running into an existing situation, realizing it is an archetype, and because each one of the archetypes has a well-defined structure, pattern of behavior, and a strategy for dealing with the archetype, I don't have to start from scratch. It's all laid out, and I can employ it. The other one is that people comment or ask the question about why are all the archetypes negative? And my comment is, I don't think they are negative. What the relationship between the archetypes gives me is a basis for being proactive, so that if I set out to do something, I can be setting out to do one of two things. I can be setting out to develop a structure that promotes growth, or I can be setting out to develop a structure which fixes a problem, which essentially is creating a balance between what something is and what I think it should be. Whichever one of those I set out to do, there's a structure for that model, that activity. And from Sengi and other places, it's almost impossible to do just one thing. So that there's something else, some other relationship that comes into play. So I start here and I say, okay, am I likely to be running into a situation where my activity overshoots the goal, or things are oscillating endlessly, or am I restricted by resources so that linear progress happens over a period of time and then it slows down, or is this fix likely to create a problem elsewhere, or is it a situation where I'm actually I'm treating the symptoms as opposed to looking at the fundamental underlying cause of the situation? So I use it in a proactive fashion to remind me to go look at things to ensure that I'm being proactive, as opposed to waiting until something happens and then saying, oh, now I forgot, I got to deal with this. So that's the basis for why I think the archetypes are useful. And there's a lot there, and I can't remember them, which is why I remember where the links to them are. Does that help, Michael? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I invite you to come back next week, because Jeff Moore will be here, and we'll talk about Kumu. And if you haven't had a chance to, well, you absolutely have had a chance to play with Kumu, because you've been embedded in it for weeks now, and that's I just think it's an amazing environment that allows one to develop representations of relationships in an amazing array of fashions, of which I think I've only scratched the surface. It's something that one can learn to actually be productive with in 15 minutes, but then, I'm waiting for them. I don't know if you've noticed yet, or if you go to kumu.io and look at Explorer, they've finally got online so that the top 20 public models developed by other people, you can go in and look at them to see what they are. At some point in time, you'll be able to search I believe you'll be able to search all of the public projects to look at them, to get ideas of what other people are doing. Hadn't noticed this. This is Son is the co-author of the new book by Bob Williams on wicked solutions. I didn't know they were putting this together. Huh. Amazing what you find if you just go wander around places. I'll have to look at this. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I thank you very much for the interactions, and we'll keep at it.
Thanks, Gene.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye, all.
Bye.